So, dear friends, colleagues, dear partners in cooperation, co-workers in other scholarly institutions in Athens and elsewhere in Greece, welcome to the annual meeting of the Finnish Institute at Athens. Θα ήθελα να αρχίσω ευχαριστώντας κάποιους άνθρωπους και υπηρεσίες που βοήθησαν το έργο του Φινλανδικού Ινστιτούτου Αθηνών τον τελευταίο χρόνο. Αρχικά θέλω ευχαριστήσω θερμά το Υπουργείο Πολιτισμού και Αθλητισμού και τις Εφορίες Αρχαιοτήτων που είχαμε την χαρά και την τιμή να συνεργαστούμε. Ιδιαίτερες ευχαριστίες στις κυρίες Καράντσαλη και Ψαρογιάννη από την Εφορία Αρχαιοτήτων, Φτιότητας και Ευρυτανίας, στον κύριο Κίσσα από την Εφορία Αρχαιοτήτων Αρκαδίας, στον κύριο Χουλιαρά και την κυρία Πλιάκου από την Εφορία Αρχαιοτήτων Δεσπρωτείας και στην κυρία Τσιγουνάκη από την Εφορία Αρχαιοτήτων Ρετύμνου. Ολοκληρώνοντας, θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω τον Δήμο Ντομοκού και τον Πολιτιστικό Σύλλογο Μελετίας. Ελπίζουμε να συνεχίσουμε τη συνεργασία μαζί σας. On behalf of the Institute, I wish to express warmest thanks to the other scholarly institutions in Greece, in Finland and elsewhere we have had pleasure to work with during the report period, which runs from May 2022 to today. My heartfelt gratitude goes especially to our knowledgeable colleagues and their friends at our neighboring Nordic institutes in Athens. We also wish to extend our thanks to the staff of the Nordic Library, Jens Mangerud and Patrick Talatas in particular, who have been most helpful, resourceful and always very friendly. We are likewise grateful to the Embassy of Finland in Athens for warm and friendly work and engagements together we've carried out during the year and look forward, of course, to cooperation in the future with utmost gratitude. I'm giving the Institute's annual report for the third time as the director, and although hopefully, maybe, having got grips with the running of the Institute a bit more, I still realize that it is through a welcome willingness to work together by the colleagues and friends in the family of archaeological and other institutions that have made the daily running of the Institute rewarding. I've learned a lot from you and I thank you for it. Every institute faces these days challenges in the financial considerations, particularly in the current standing of the world, and we are no exception. In the matter of the external funding, I wish to express my special gratefulness to the generous and invaluable financial support by the so-called support delegation of the Finnish Institute at Athens, Tukidelegaatio in Finnish that is, without which it would not have been possible to carry out many of our activities, particularly those relating to our archaeological fieldwork. Before getting into those reports, reporting our activities, I wish to mention the importance of the home ground. None of the operations of the Institute would have been possible without our dedicated, valued and wonderful staff. During the year, we have faced big changes in our personnel because of two long-serving members of our staff have retired. First, Lena Katsandoni ended her 20-year career as a carer and keeper of our hostel house, Koroneos building, last summer, and Maria Martsuku, her very close to 40 years of work at the Institute in March this year. Vasiliki Katsandoni started in a new post of coordinator in December. We continuously very warmly welcome you, Vassa. And importantly, accept our sincere gratitude to Lena for her work at the Institute, and Maria. Your work has been immeasurable and it truly extends beyond the Institute administration and making Finnish literature and culture known in Greece in your translations. You have in many ways been the face of the Institute for so long. I hope, where are you, Maria? I hope she's here. Thank you, Maria. Antti Lampinen certainly deserves a special mention here, since he will not be us as a member of the staff next year at this event as the assistant director. Otherwise, I hope he would be here in other capacity, because his term with us unfortunately draws to an end in November this year. Antti, yours has really been a great job. We are thankful for it. See you somewhere there. Take actually everything good out of the time you still have with us. Lassi Jakola, who is here, and I have actually some pictures of there, so sorry, I'm running late with them on. Lassi Jakola, who is here as well tonight, is starting in the position of assistant director in December. So already a very warm welcome, Lassi. Here you see both of them. Let's go back a little bit. So Memi Kurtuba, Joachim Stavropoulos, Arto Penttinen, who worked very successfully at the hostel for 6 months, Camilla Riscala, Julie Rehema, and our fantastic current interns, Andrea Nyholm and Hanna Siponen. Thank you all. I'm now going to present you examples of our scholarly events during the report period. Leather making and leather in ancient Greece is one of the reoccurring themes in our scholarly activities. Last summer, we organized an event with the title Hands-on Tanning in our garden, where 2 skillful and experienced tanners presented the traditional tanning methods via discussion and demonstrations following talk on leather making methods in ancient Greece. Audience at that event had the chance really to put their hands on tanning and leather. Markers of Northernness in Greek ethnography and geography was an international conference considering the conception, perceptions, and practicalities of Northernness in ancient sources. Antti Lampinen was instrumental in the organization, and the results of the event are going to be published in our monograph series. Our yearly Sundvall lecture was given last year by Professor Lilian Karali, who shed light on the contribution of archaeomalacological research to Aegean archaeology in November. The Evening of Letters was a kind of once-in-the-lifetime event early this spring. It was organized to give tribute to Maria Martsuku and her long career at the Institute. Nearly all of the previous directors of the Institute who still are with us came to Athens to an event at the Institute which was titled Letters from the Past, where they all greeted Maria with a letter they had themselves chosen from their own research material, spanning from late Hellenistic to Roman and Byzantine leather communication. Together with the Finnish Academy-funded project Toxic Crimes Project, the Athens Public International Law Center, and National Kapodistrian University of Athens, we arranged with them rather recently an international workshop to discuss the legal, historical, and practical aspects of environmental protection during armed conflicts from ancient to contemporary contexts. This event brought together a group of international specialists on this perennial issue of the attitudes which pertain to the relationship between the nature, environment, and war. Through a mobility program for scholars and artists run by the Finnish Cultural and Academic Institutes abroad, we facilitated and organized an event on the Aegean traditional boats and maritime crafts. Another event on the right there, facilitated by the same program, was entitled Painting the City, Aesthetics and Politics of a Public Wall, when the roles and altering functions of mural paintings were discussed in dialogue with the audience and practicing artists as well as scholars. A public event organized together with the Ephorate of Antiquities of Theotida and Evrytania, and the municipality of Domokos in November in Domokos, Thiotis, was presented to the local community with the meaning of telling them about the results of our first season of work on Melitaja archaeological program, which of course I'm going to tell you more very soon. We heard 9 greeting speeches by the Minister of Finance, 4 members of Parliament, and the Bishop Simeon among them. We had presentations by Konstantina Psaroyanni, the co-director of the program, and the members of the Melitaja research team. In addition, Maria Martsuku presented her co-authored, recently published book, in which Domokos's more modern history plays an important role. The event was attended and welcomed heartwarmingly well by the local people. It got plenty of attention in the local media, and thereby assured us about the welcoming and positive attitude towards our archaeological work in Thiotis. We are, of course, very extremely thankful for that. Translating and translations have been an important part of the Institute's activities over the years, and last year we arranged the second translation seminar and workshop to follow up from previous year's events. This time translators of modern Greek literature into Finnish and discussed the publishing strategies and practices, and the translators worked on the practical issue of their craft in a workshop that followed the public event. In the publishing front, we established a new electronic publication series, Gryphos. Its first volume, authored by Vasilios Sabatakakis and George Kalpadakis, came out in the end of the last year. It is a publication, translation, reproduction, and commentary of a previously unpublished early Swedish anonymous Philhellenic pamphlet from the year 1821. This first volume characterizes the new series. We hope that it does it well. Gryphos complements our monograph series, papers and monographs from the Finnish Institute, as a fully open access, peer-reviewed online series, which welcomes also shorter treatises and scholarly productions from the fields of the Institute's academic coverage. Antti Lampinen, together with Emilia Matthias Fernandes, edited the volume Seafaring and Mobility in the Late Antiquity and Antique Mediterranean, which came out last autumn. The education and teaching front, we were active in a more normal way after the couple of years which were not so normal before because of the pandemic. Our traditional introductory course to ancient Greek BA level students was organized in September-October. And here warm thanks go again to Antti Lampinen, also certainly on behalf of many impressed and enthused students, because you have really skillfully carried out the guidance for them into our craft and scholarships and the environment that they really learned so much about. Further education program, Further education teachers, you see on the slides on the right-hand side, has proved to be an important part of our teaching program. Last summer, we had the pleasure to provide the history and social studies teachers with education in ancient Greek and Roman past and get them acquainted with the ancient sites during the excursion program. A few examples now from our cultural activities. Touring of the revived joint pan-Nordic exhibition on early travelers to Greece, with the title Greece Through the Eyes of the Travelers from the North, arranged together with the institutes and the embassies in Athens, was active throughout the year. We took it last year to Corfu, to the library of the Ionian University. For our well-being, we wish to see physical culture as an integral part of the culture, of course. And so the so-called Menalios Tromos road running event was run again for the 4th time in October 2022 to promote the knowledge of the ancient Menalian games on foot of the Mount Menalios in the area where one of the Institute's excavation sites is situated. New translations of Finnish literature in Greek came out as a result of Maria Martsuku's skillful work. She finished a massive work of translating Mika Valtari's historical novel Young Johannes with the title Proskinitis. And on the other end of the literary genres, she translated together with Riikka Pulkkinen Max Sieg's thriller The Ice Cavern, which came out in Greek with the title Dictio. In the field of literature, we organized together with Ayora Publishing House a book launch and reading event with presentations of recent translations of Finnish literature in Greek by Riikka Pulkkinen and 11 Greek poets. In addition to adopting a hybrid format as one of the standard ways to communicate our events after the years of the pandemic, we have also dedicated special efforts to creating edited recordings which have an afterlife or continuation as a kind of repository and permanent library of our events for anyone to see and return to. Now we get into archaeological fieldwork reports. And we go first, we go in an order that I will explain to you, but here you see on this slide Institute's active field programs. We have altogether 5 archaeological field programs, and first we go to Melitea. The Melitea archaeological program is a new cooperation between the Epheria of Antiquities of Phthiotis and Evrytania and the Finnish Institute at Athens, directed by Konstantina Psaroyanni and myself, with Stavros Lambrianis as field director. The first field season of the 5-year program was carried out in October-November. The following report is a joint undertaking by Konstantina Psaroyanni and myself. The site of ancient Melitea, one of the most important city-states of Achaea Phthiotis in antiquity, is located east of the north of the modern village with the same name. It is situated in the municipality of Domokos, at the northern foot of Mount Ortis, near the mythically important river Enipeus. Through its strategic position, it controlled the road connecting Thessaly with the Gulf of Malea, Thermopylae, and southern Greece. Well-fortified Melitea was therefore strategically very important during classical Hellenistic and Roman times. The ancient city is stacked on 3 large natural plateaus, that of Acropolis, the Anopolis, and the Catopolis, as you see on the slide. These are divided by the inner cross wall. Melitea flourished from the 5th century BC until the late Roman era, but activities continued till the first Christian centuries. It figures in several ancient sources, Thucydides, Xenophon, Plutarch, and Strabo, mentioning it amongst others, and we have a number of long inscriptions indicating the arrangements in the Melitean polis. The Chora of the polis seems to have occupied a very large area, the boundaries of which are known somewhat accurately thanks to these texts. In the 4th century, the city issued bronze coins with Zeus on the obverse and the bee on the reverse. Regardless of this, Melitea has rather surprisingly not been systematically investigated archaeologically by the means of any longer-term archaeological programs. Friedrich Stellin published an outline of the topography of the area and the first plan of the fortification of the city in 1924. And in 1970 to 71, the ninth region of Antiquities of Thebes conducted a relatively short-term excavations on the Acropolis of the ancient city, where important finds were found, some of them now being exhibited at the Archaeological Museum in Lamia. During the first field season of the new program in Meletea, we had the following aims. First, to provide a general survey of the Ute site for more detailed archaeological investigations during the years to come. Second, to clear off the fill from the X-shaped trench of the 1970s excavation and document the structures underneath photogrammetrically. Third, to map and measure the multiple walls, particularly on the Acropolis area. And lastly, to establish data handling principles and conservation facilities for the future archaeological work. Now, due to the very large size of the site, it's approximately 67 hectares, a LiDAR, that is a light detection and ranging investigation, was carried out from an aeroplane by Geomatics company based in Athens. The results show the terrain below the vegetation in detailed relief and give us a clear indication of architectural structures and other structures as shown in these examples. Here you see the whole site. And then the LiDAR image of it. There is Acropolis more clearly with the X there that I'm going to talk a bit more in a minute. Here's an example of the lower city walls, which are completely, of course, there under the vegetation. And the last example here is just outside the city, the very clearly visible LiDAR picture of a structure under the vegetation. We carried out also geophysical work during this season 22, and the following report of geophysical work is provided by Robin Rönnlund. A magnetometric survey in 4 fields was carried out in the border area between lower and upper city and in the lower city itself. There are some ex-situ architectural blocks in this area. The results strongly indicate buried remains at several locations. The clear outlines of a large street, Alpha, on the slide, can be discerned in the largest of the fields, which is number 1. The street leads in a general northwest-southeast direction towards what had previously been identified as a possible location of a gate in the fortification wall, Beta. Fragmentary traces of buildings can be discerned, flanking the street. Here can also deviating side streets be discerned, marked with Gamma. Also in the field to the south of the largest field can streets be discerned. This is marked with Delta. Albeit of a lesser sizes, these streets they follow the same general direction as the aforementioned large street. The outlines of building foundations can be seen in the magnetometric image. Further to the south of this field is the smallest of the fields, which is number 2. The magnetometric results here are very clear, with indications of buried architecture, with epsilon there. An over 40 meters long, multi-room building, which appears to have a stoa-like shape, is found in the northern part of the field, marked here with Zeta. Further work is planned in the area in the coming season to get the complete outline of this building. There is still the last field, number 4, in the upper parts of the lower city, where team confirmed several large scars in the ground caused by bulldozing, and also a larger building, which due to the existence of strong magnetic material appears without much definition in the results. The program will continue the survey of the coming years to get a better and more complete view of the buried remains. We are very grateful for the work of Robin and his team. Clearing of the fill of the X-shaped trenches of the 1970s excavations was carried out on the Acropolis. And here I wish to thank Lambros Stavroyannis. In the area under the fill, then 10 rather well-built limestone walls were exposed. The cleared out structures were documented then photogrammetrically. These walls seem to continue under the layer of the fill with straight orientation beyond the cleared area. Amongst the finds, which naturally come from a non-stratified and mixed layers, were lots of generally well-preserved pottery from various periods, mostly from late Hellenistic to especially Roman times. Here, one nice graffiti as well. Lamps, large fragments of stamped tiles, and fragments of figurines were amongst them, yet domestic cooking-ware was almost absent. This could point to the non-domestic nature of the building underneath. The fill included also various metal finds, fibulae, pieces of jewelry, nails and bronze metal nails, and a bronze medical instrument amongst them. Plenty of glass fragments, a green glass bead with the so-called eye decoration among them, as well as plenty of animal bones and shells were cleared from the fill. The city of Meletea was strongly fortified with walls 3.80 meters thick. The walls formed a dividing inner cross between the upper and the lower districts, with an acropolis at the uppermost part. The LiDAR investigation has directed us to locate the walls better, as shown on the picture here. The walls on the acropolis were cleared of vegetation and mapped. The continuation of the walls was discovered, as well as a small gateway west to the tower on the acropolis. The work on the infrastructure of the program was established. Conservation work, especially for metal finds, was carried out in the work premises, which were very kindly arranged for us by the program, for us and the whole program also in the future, by the Cultural Association of Meletea in the former school of the village. Lastly, it is well worth mentioning, with utmost gratitude of course, that the municipality of Domokos and Meletea have welcomed our program exceptionally and warmly. We are grateful for the municipality of Domokos and the Cultural Association of Meletea, the mayor Babis Lolios and Vasilis Karapetsas for their fantastic support, and never to forget, and we will not, the Metropolitan, who provided us with the beautiful lodgings in Domokos with one of the best views in the universe. Second field program. Now we go to Aia Paraskevi of Arak Hamitai. Systematic excavations at Aia Paraskevi of Arak Hamitai in Arcadia were conducted under the direction of Björn Forsén from the University of Helsinki. He reports the following. During the first 5-year program, we concentrated upon a Hellenistic courtyard building that was accessed from the west through a monumental propylon, and this period ended 2014. The courtyard was flanked by rows of mostly square rooms used for bathing, preparing of food, and communal meals and drinking. Roof tile stamps prove the building proof that the building belonged to the sanctuary of Artemis Lykoatis, mentioned by Pausanias. This Hellenistic building was destroyed around 30 BC and replaced by a larger Roman courtyard building further to the east. On the basis of our earlier work, we have been able to trace the beginnings of cult activity back to the 10th and 9th centuries BC, the oldest identified structures being a couple of terrace walls and small altars. The altar area was at some stage during the early 3rd century BC demarcated in the north by a L-shaped store, and in the south by a P store, which both also were destroyed around 30 BC. Cult activity nonetheless continues in the altar area until the early 3rd century, writes Björn Forsén. During the field season 22, which is the last one of the program, we concentrated on the northern wing of the Hellenistic courtyard building. The aim here was to elucidate the date of the different building phases of the northern wing of the Hellenistic courtyard building. The Hellenistic walls constructed on top of the remains of the 6th or 5th century clearly predate the L-shaped stoa further to the east. Architecturally, they seem to post-date the rooms 20 and 21 further towards the west. We reopened these two rooms in order to find out whether there might exist an earlier phase below the layers dating to 150 to 50 BC. The work brought important results. First of all, we realized that the middle part of the northern wing of the Hellenistic courtyard building belongs to a separate earlier construction. We are here dealing with a rectangular building which had 3 similar sized rooms, all opening towards a hall in the south. The hall was demarcated in the south by a wall built of large rectangular and flat limestone blocks, on top of which probably stood a row of columns. This building predates not only the western and eastern ends of the northern wing, but also all of the Hellenistic courtyard buildings. Room 21 produced rich stratified finds. Immediately below the collapsed roof tile layer followed a layer with Megarian bowl sherds dating to between 150 and 50 BC. Below this layer followed an earlier one. Surprisingly, most of the pottery here dates to the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, although some even earlier finds were recorded in the lowermost part of the layer, such as 5th century BC lamp, a black glazed alabastron from 6th to 5th century, and a mortar dating to 425 to 300 BC. The layer also contained coins from Sicyon, Leucas and Pelinna in Thessaly, dating to the second half of or late 4th century BC. The early finds from room 21 suggest a date of construction of the rectangular building in the center of the northern wing to around 400 BC. This date was confirmed by the finds from the lowermost part of the room 20. The finds from this room consisted of coins, pottery and loom weights, but not even a single fragment of a figurine. Among the pottery can be mentioned large amounts of different drinking cups, plates, bowls, jugs, hydriae, and some cooking ware, which indicate that the room was used for drinking and eating, perhaps for some kind of sacred meals. In the architectural terms, the rectangular building finds a good parallel in the banquet hall, forming part of the southeastern building at the sanctuary of Athena Thea, which most recently has been dated to the early 4th century BC. After the 11th and final season of intense excavations at Arakamitai, Ayaparaskevi, we will now, within the coming years, continue and intensify the preparation for the final publication of our work at Ayaparaskevi. Right, Björn Forsén. We go then to Fotike. The Fotike project is a synergasia between Ioannis Kouliaras of the Ephorate of Antiquities of Thesprotia and Björn Forsén of the University of Helsinki. The project includes field survey, geophysical prospection, as well as excavation at places of special interest within Fotiki, which was a Roman colony, which later developed into a medieval bishopric see. In 22, we worked approximately 150 meters to the northeast of the early Christian Panagia Lambovitra Basilica. This field had produced one of the highest find densities during the survey earlier. Geophysical prospection indicated the existence of building, including 2 square-ish constructions. But now it soon turned out that we were excavating 2 Roman mausolea of the built chamber tomb type, located approximately 25 meters apart from each other. Mausoleum 1 was close to the square opening, the facade being flanked by 2 creating a porch. The walls were built of consecutive stone and brick layers, the side walls being thicker than the back and the front walls, thus indicating that the grave chamber of this type was covered by a barrel vault. The threshold of the door and the terracotta brick floor of the grave chamber were well preserved. This mausoleum contained 4 cist graves, of which 3 inside the grave chamber and 1 in front of the entrance. There were also 3 tile-covered graves and 1 amphora grave for children or infants inside the grave chamber. One of the cist graves was found robbed, 1 intact, whereas 2 obviously had been reused during antiquity and did no longer contain the original burials or burial gifts. Grave 4 contained at least 3 burials laid down on top of each other. 4 lamps, 1 jug, and 5 cooking pots, as well as several coins were recorded, dating the grave to the late 2nd or 3rd century AD. The construction of the mausoleum itself goes back to the 2nd century AD. Grave 2 and 7 contained 4 to 5 burials each, with no burial gifts except for coins. The bones of the deceased had mainly been collected into irregular heaps, with the exception of a couple buried at the bottom of a grave 7. The secondary burials in this grave can be dated to the 4th century. Grave 2 contained several sherds belonging to the thin-walled cooking pot, dating to the 3rd century AD. Joining pieces of the same pot were recorded on the floor between grave 1 and 2. This indicates that grave 2, just as also number 7, was reopened at some stage during antiquity, assumably to be reused. The lack of grave gifts in the graves 2 and 7 indicate a late date for the reuse of this of the kists to the second half of the 4th or even the early 5th century AD. Mausoleum 2 was rectangular in shape, consisting of a chamber and a pronaos. Here again, the chamber seemed to have been covered by a barrel vault. The threshold of a floor was preserved, whereas nothing remained of the chamber floor, although tesserae from a mosaic may indicate that the chamber originally had a mosaic floor. The chamber of a mausoleum 2 contained 2 cist graves, 1 amphora grave, and the grave glinae. Additionally, we uncovered in pronaos a tile-covered grave. The grave glinae was built of bricks and plaster, probably covering a cist grave, which we did not excavate. Only half of the original glinae survives. At some stage, the grave had been opened, whereby the other half of the glinae had to be removed. The surface of the original glinae was covered by a painting of plants, fruits, and different birds in the style which could be Antonine. The glinaean decoration is unique. Nothing similar has ever been found in Epirus. Grave 2 was intact. It contained the remains of a person lying on his or her back, together with 2 lamps, 2 cooking pots, 2 glass vessels, and a jug and a coin in the mouth. One of the lamps has on its bottom the stamp Olympianu, dating to the 3rd century. Grave 3 had been robbed, leaving only the skeletons of 2 deceased and fragments of 2 broken glass vessels. The amphora found close to this grave dates to the 3rd to 4th century AD, indicating that also this grave was late. The graves 2, 3, and 4 were all found deep below the original floor level of the mausoleum, covered by thick layers of stones, tile, and pottery fragments, as well as mortar. Of these, mausoleum 2 resembles closely the mausoleum of Savali next to Igumenitsa, which has been dated to the early or mid 2nd century AD. The original construction of this mausoleum can thus be dated to that period. Our mausolea were located next to the main road, leading south from Fotike. Grave inscriptions and remains of grave monuments, registered all the way to the main asphalt road in the south, showed that the grave road was about 600 meters long. In fact, the fact that our mausolea were found so far north indicates that the early imperial urban center of Fotike must have been located on the north side of the brook of Liveri. During the late 5th and or early 6th century, residential buildings were constructed on top of the mausolea. The walls were now added to the late antique buildings. Some of them we also uncovered. These residential buildings are contemporaneous with the Basilica of Panagia Lambavitra, and indeed fragments of 1st to 3rd century AD grave inscriptions were reused in its construction. The construction of residential buildings superimposing the previous cemetery indicates a clear break in tradition with the past, possibly the result of the town having been destroyed and rebuilt by new settlers. This break could perhaps be connected with the Vandal invasions during the 460s and 70s, during which even Bishop Diadochos of Fotike was taken as slave to northern Africa. 4th fieldwork project takes us to Retimnon, close to Retimnon Hill Countryside Archaeological Program. This is an interdisciplinary regional archaeological project directed as well by Björn Fossen and Anna Lucia D'Agata, Consiglio Nazionale della Ricerche. And the aim of the project is to investigate selected parts of a 25 square kilometer large area located to the south of the modern Retimnon, and to form a picture of the diachronic development of human presence and ecology. Björn Fossen reports the following. The earlier discovered finds range from date from late Neolithic, early Bronze Age until the late Roman/early Byzantine periods. The emphasis lying on the Bronze Age and late Roman or early Byzantine periods, showing a continuity in the use of the site for most of the 2nd millennium BC. During the 3rd field season, in August 22, we focused on Kefala of Mundros, as well as the range of fields between Ailias, Kefala, and the cemetery of Zouridi. The hill of Kefala is located approximately half a kilometer to the north of the village of Mundros, offering not only a great view all the way down to the sea at Betsas in the north, but also towards the important mountain pass leading to the southern coast of Crete. On Kefala, we recorded archaic to Hellenistic finds covering an area of 4.5 hectares. Hundreds of black or brown glazed shirts, together with pithos or basin shirts, olynthes mill, stone fragments, loom weights, spindle walls, and figurine. 2 lamps fragments were collected. A few architectural blocks and stone mortars were also recorded. This is clearly a substantial site, the fluoroid of which occurred between the 6th and the 4th centuries BC, when Kefala, without doubt, was the main site of our study area. A handful of geometric search indicate that Kefala probably was settled since the 8th century BC. There are also signs of later activity, represented by some Roman pottery, including the northern Italian sigillata sherds and 2 ARS sherds. Worthwhile noting is also a thin scatter Bronze Age pottery. The fields at Kefala finally produced quite a lot of early modern to modern pottery, connected to the agricultural work performed here by the inhabitants of Mudros. During the Venetian period, the hill summit was used as a military vantage point to control the important pass crossing to the southern coast of Crete. On the Ray summit, there are remains of a close to square construction built on small stones and mortar, probably the foundation of a tower with question marks. The southwest of Ilias, to the southwest of Ilias, we documented more Bronze Age material finds between the village and the cemetery of Suridi, where we had identified another bronze site in 2021. A group of fields to the southeast of Ilias yielded coeval material. 2 concentrations of late Roman or early Byzantine finds were identified in the same fields as the Bronze Age material, probably indicating similar agripastoral use of the land during these 2 different periods. We noted the presence of special late Roman ware as well as African red lip amphorae fragments, which could indicate the existence of scattered farms. A larger medieval settlement was finally detected next to the Aia Fotini of Rustica. Last fieldwork project, and this one is a very short one. There are some of the finds still from Retimno. The last one takes us to Naxos in Sicily. Professor Jari Pakkanen's collaborative project of urban landscape of Naxos in Sicily has concentrated on a re-evaluation of the urban territory of the settlement and providing a thorough re-evaluation of the full urban territory. The settlement was the first Greek colony in Sicily, and it was founded in 734 BCE by oikists from Chalkis on Euboea and Naxos in the Cyclades. The project has been carried out as a part of the research collaboration agreement between the Museum of Naxos and the Finnish Institute at Athens. And the third partner of the project has been the Finnish Institute in Rome. The project directors are Jari Pakkanen and Maria Constanza Lentini. The field season at Naxos in Sicily was started after Easter this year, and Professor Jari Pakkanen reports as follows. The cityscape project at Naxos has had 3 main aims: documenting the architectural remains unearthed since the 1950s, carrying out geophysical prospection inside the city walls, and excavating new small-scale test trenches at strategic locations. The documentation project at Naxos have been very closely linked with the 3D development program of the Finnish Institute. The ongoing fieldwork season is direct continuation of the excavation started in 2019 at the crossroads of Platea A and Stenopos 7. The location of the trends is indicated here on the slide by the yellow square. In addition, further study of the domestic architectural material from a well excavated in 2015 and 16 has been carried out in the storerooms of the Archaeological Park of Naxos. An initial report of the material was published last autumn, and the more thorough presentation of the material can be expected next spring. Location of this well is indicated by the red circle on the slide. Both 2019 and 93 excavations have been directed by Maria Constanza Lentini. Platia A is the main east-west main street, and Stenopos 7 is the narrower north-south street. The slide presents the area at the start of this spring's work. The top layers of the northern half of the excavated area are characterized by a collapsed roof lying very near the current surface. And this is the situation a couple of weeks ago. What is presented in the next slide is based on the work in process. Oops. Wow, that was interesting. This is the next slide. The house wall and the monumental base in the southeast corner of the crossroads are similar to other crossroads of the classical city grid. These and the small oval base are highlighted with the green lines in the slide. The original 5th century street surface of Stenopos 7 is also preserved. What is surprising is the monumental wall blocking the road. All pottery so far discovered is classical pottery, that is, and there is no indication that the wall would have been built after the destruction of the city by Syracuse in 403 BCE. The current hypothesis is that the structure stops wheeled traffic running on Stenopos 7. The preserved threshold block indicates that there was a double doorway, so pedestrians would have been able to pass through coming from the south. It can also be noted that the tiles are consistent with the reconstruction of a roofed propylon. With Maria Constanza Lentini, we have advocated for some time that the Agora of Naxos was located near the harbor, a little north from the area now being excavated. A monumental entrance at the crossroad is an indication of the importance of this sector of the city. Now we are in the end of our field reports. And we turn to our main part. I'm going to introduce our speaker of tonight. Judith Barringer is Professor of Greek Art and Archaeology with the University of Edinburgh since 2007. She holds her degrees from Yale and has taught at several colleges and universities in the US, held positions and fellowships on 3, if not more, continents at American and European universities, including Greece, Germany, UK, and Austria. Her areas of specialization are Greek art and archaeology, Greek history, myth and religion, with special interest in intersections between art and religion from archaic through Hellenistic periods. Everyone studying these themes knows her research. As Judy's work covers a great variety of intriguing and central themes in the study of ancient Greek past. Reading her research is truly enjoyable, like an intelligent and joyful play with complex issues which she then unfolds from a minimal templates into fascinating narratives. It's therefore no surprising that she has received numerous awards for her academic work. Her most recent monograph, Olympia, A Cultural History, and a collection of essays co-edited with François Lisserac, entitled Images of the Crossroads, Meanings, Media, Methods, came out just over the last 2 years from Princeton and Edinburgh University presses, respectively. Her textbook, The Art and Archaeology of Ancient Greece, received the Professional Scholarly Excellence Award for the best textbook in the arts and humanities from the American Association of Publishers in 2016. But how could we forget her earlier work either? For instance, Art, Myth and Ritual in Classical Greece from 2008, The Hunt in Ancient Greece from 2001, and Divine Escorts narrates and the archaic and classical Greek art from 1995. Judy is currently working on a new monograph, Seeking the Divine in a Faraway Place, concerning the relationship between Western Greek cities and sanctuaries on the Greek mainland and Aegean Islands from the 7th to the 1st centuries BC. There is one important aspect about Judy. Namely, she is very, very, very nice person, a real citizen of the world, and a real woman of the world, of both humans and animals, or animals and humans, I would say, with open heart and fantastic mind. Her interest in how structures and images acquire meanings for ancient patrons and viewers from their physical and social context relates to the topic we are going to hear Judy speaking to us this evening. When she gave me her title for the talk tonight, I was wondering what she might be thinking of an idea to start erecting treasuries in the gardens of our institute for our patrons to secure our financial standings. I'm sure, actually, and I hope that Judy would come up with a pertinent plan and well-reasoned for suggestions. So now, Judy, please, floor is yours for the workings of treasuries in Greek sanctuaries.
Can you all hear me? Καλό βράδυ και ευχαριστώ. Petra, thank you so much for that warm and flowery introduction. I feel as if nothing I can say can measure up to the introduction. So thank you. And thank you for this wonderful invitation. I thank the Finnish Institute as well for this. And thank you. I am enormously honored to be here and to be giving this talk in conjunction with the annual meeting at the Finnish Institute. Scholars have long studied treasuries, particularly the well-known examples at Olympia and Delphi. Using a combination of written and architectural evidence, a recent study identified 101 such structures dating from the 7th to 2nd centuries BC. The scholarly focus has been on the architecture and on sculpture when it exists. Although we know from ancient authors such as Pausanias that treasuries housed objects, specifically gifts to the god, often from a polis, less attention has been given to the administration, placement, and accessibility of treasuries. This paper addresses these questions, although definitive answers are often elusive because of the lack of evidence or because of its ambiguity. The treasuries under discussion here are the small freestanding buildings found in sanctuaries such as those at Delphi, Olympia, and Delos. Ancient texts refer to such structures as thesauroi, oikemata, oikoi, and this is especially used on Delos, and naoi. And the last two, oikoi and naoi, sometimes occur interchangeably. Inscriptions on the Athenian treasury at Delphi use both thesauros and oikos. Nearly all buildings identified as treasuries, either by inscription, ancient authors, or modern scholars, are rectangular, one-room structures, often with a porch. We should not exclude the possibility that treasures could be of other forms. Partida, for example, has identified the monopteros at Delphi as a treasury. In the case of the usual one-room structures, one is hard-pressed to distinguish these small treasuries from small temples, save for the absence of an altar, although yes, there are temples with no apparent altar, such as the Hephaestion in the Athenian Agora. Certainly, temples often served as treasuries, as we know from Pausanias, and from inventories such as those for the pronaos of the Parthenon. The oikemata mentioned in the Hecatompedon inscription on the Athenian Acropolis presents special problems, since we do not know where they were, but the archaic limestone pediments found on the Acropolis are considered by many to belong to treasury buildings, those oikemata mentioned in the inscription. For the purposes of this study, we shall classify them as treasury buildings. The nomenclature is, however, problematic. since ancient texts, especially inscriptions, also refer to portable, though heavy, money boxes as thesauroi. An example from the sanctuary of Aphrodite Orania, probably from the cult site on the north side of the Athenian Acropolis, is inscribed thesauros. Ancient inscriptions from sanctuaries often stipulate that the fees for various purposes, including sacrificial animals, were to be deposited in and taken from thesauroi. In instances when thesauroi hold cash offerings and payments, scholars usually interpret the term to signify portable money boxes rather than buildings. Is this assumption warranted? In other words, must we assume that all thesauroi holding cash were money boxes rather than buildings? This ambiguity in terminology bedevils our understanding of inscriptions mentioning thesauroi. Treasury buildings have not been found in every sanctuary or even in most sanctuaries. They appear in the Pan-Hellenic sanctuaries of Delphi, where we have approximately 30, in Olympia, where we have a dozen or so, possibly at Nemea, and in sanctuaries with a large international clientele, such as the Heraion on Samos or the Apollo Sanctuary on Delos. Treasuries have been identified on the basis of their foundation and plan at sites in Epiros, the Hellenistic Asclepion in Butrint, and the sanctuary of Zeus Naos at Dodona, and is mentioned on Samos, as well as on Kos, Samothrace, Paros, Halicarnassus, and at Eleusis, Calydon, Knidos, Cyrene, Miletos, Paestum, Voce del Sele, and possibly Gela. We might also consider whether other one-room structures standing close to the central temple in sanctuaries, buildings usually designated as heroa, might actually be treasuries. For example, two adjacent rectangular buildings, numbers 17 and 18 of the 6th century BC in the Athena Pronaia sanctuary at Delphi, stand alone on a retaining wall. This area has been labeled a heroon to Philakos, based on Pausanias, who says, as he apparently moves in this direction, that the heroon is near the Athena Pronaia hieron. Could it be that one of these two buildings is a treasury, while the other is a heroon? When the patrons of treasuries are known, and this is not usually the case, they are tyrants or polis. Treasuries at Delphi, how did this come out? Oh no. There's supposed to be a plan of Delphi underneath all those pink dots. This is very worrying, but I think maybe it will correct itself. We'll see. Treasuries at Delphi represent the widest geographical range, pan-Mediterranean, while those at Delos have concentrations of buildings from the Cyclades. Sponsors of the, here, okay, there it is. Okay, so now you have it. Sponsors of the Olympia treasuries tend to be from the Peloponnese and Western Greece, Magna Graecia, but are not exclusively so. However, all treasuries at Olympia were built by Dorian cities, while Dorian, Ionian, and Aeolian cities erected treasuries at Delphi. Roux explains the distribution of treasury buildings among sanctuaries with respect to the polis controlling the sanctuaries. Those sanctuaries, overseen by lesser cities or body of polis, had more treasuries, while those controlled by single powerful cities had few or none. According to him, this inverse proportion of power to number of treasuries is a consequence of the influence exerted by cities such as Corinth and Argos, whose overwhelming power discouraged other polis from advertising themselves in sanctuaries, such as Isthmia. I find this reasoning unsatisfactory. The sanctuaries with the most treasuries seem to be the most renowned sanctuaries, those with the greatest foot traffic, the festivals drawing the biggest crowds. There are famous sanctuaries that appear not to have treasuries, but treasuries seem to multiply at large sanctuaries. What was the motivation for building a treasury? From ancient authors and inscriptions, we know that treasury buildings functioned as votives in and of themselves, and most obviously were declarations of wealth. The building's architecture reflected regional preferences. In other words, treasuries employed materials and decorative forms from the patron's home. Numerous treasuries were military victory offerings and built with war booty. For example, the Megarian treasury at Olympia on Foundation 11 here was built with spoils from Corinth. And this is also true of the treasuries at Delphi belonging to Acanthos, Thebes, Syracuse, Athens, Spina, and possibly Cnidos. The Siphnian treasury at Delphi was a thank offering for sudden wealth from the silver mines, and Pausanias suggests that although displaying wealth could be a motivation for constructing a treasury, the Potidians were motivated by piety in building their treasury at Delphi. At Olympia, a win in the games might have been the impetus for dedicating a treasury. The presence among the Olympia treasury roofs of 3 roof types, typical of Croton and its environs, together with the prominence of Olympic victors from Croton, there were 21 between 672 and 484 BC, has prompted scholars to suggest that one of the unassigned treasuries at Olympia was built by Croton, an Achaean colony. And in fact, Pausanias claims that Myron's Olympic victory in 648 was the occasion for the construction of the first treasury at Olympia, the Sicyonian treasury, which is number 1 on the plan. Hermann, however, dismisses Pausanias' explanation and instead proposes that the Olympian treasuries were built to commemorate military, not athletic victories. Holger Beitinger seems to offer confirmation of this idea by pointing to a correlation between the cities that built treasuries at Olympia and the cities who dedicated inscribed bronze weapons, a practice that began only in the early 5th century BC when treasury building ceased. In other words, one practice may have replaced the other. This may be true for the Olympia treasuries, but such a correlation would be difficult to find at other sanctuaries because of the absence of evidence. Because some inscriptions indicate that treasuries, both building and money boxes, were to be opened periodically and stipulate who had keys, it seems logical to assume that treasuries were kept locked most of the time. Athenaeus records the story of Theoros, who locked himself overnight in the treasury building of Spina at Delphi, where he left behind a garland after having sex with a statue of a stone boy. The Delphi officials consulted with the god about a punishment, but the trespasser was permitted to go free. One wonders if the violation was the assault on the statue, staying overnight in the sanctuary or in the treasury, or a combination of the above. Treasury buildings sometimes were secured with metal grills, as indicated by dowel holes between jam courses on the facades, as was true of the Athenian treasury at Delphi, and Roux opines that when treasury doors were open for viewing on special occasions, the metal grills remained closed. Inaccessibility, or more accurately, difficulty in access, was sometimes ensured by steps too narrow or too high to climb easily, although we should note that there are several places in and outside of ancient Greek sanctuaries that were meant to be traversed by the public but are not easily accessible. Think of stairs in ancient theaters, for example. As for windows, the Theban treasury at Delphi may have had a west-facing window, but this is controversial. Who was in charge of the buildings? And who was responsible for access to the treasury and control of its contents? One would suppose that after their consecration, treasuries and their contents became the property of the deity, and that their administration resided with the sanctuary priests and trustees, and this is normally the case. However, we should note that when the tyrant Cypselus' tyranny ended, the Corinthians wished to inscribe the name of the city on the treasury and on a golden statue at Olympia, also dedicated by Cypselus. The Delphi officials acceded to their wishes, but the Olympia officials did not. In this instance, the objects remained in the god's realm, but a struggle erupted over credit for the dedication. In other words, there was still some human claim on it. Keys to treasuries usually were entrusted to several sanctuary officials, as we know from inscriptions, and the key holders were involved in the mandatory periodic opening of treasuries. I mention here only a few examples. There are many more. The keys to the Thesauros for Aphrodite Pontia in the Asklepion on Kos of the 2nd century AD were in the hands of the prostatai, who together with the priestess opened the Thesauros annually and distributed money. Part went to the priestess and part to the goddess. The latter sum was designated for repairs to and constructions in the sanctuary. A similar procedure is known from an inscription of around 125 to 75 BC concerning the sale of a priesthood, also from the Asklepion. The priest, prostatai, and trapezetai held keys. Again, the thesauros should be opened annually, but in this case, the contents were to be removed. One assumes that this refers to cash because 1/3 of the contents went to the priest, while the other 2/3 were designated for animal offerings. The well-known Hecatompedon inscription from the Athenian Acropolis offers another example. It decrees that the Tamiai are responsible for opening the oikemata in the Hecatompedon 3 times each month. Wherever these structures were is outside the purview of this paper. Thank goodness. In these cases, then, sanctuary officials had control of the treasuries. They were not always male. At Delos, we know of a neochore, as well as neochoroi, who supervised the treasuries of Mykonos and Charistos. But we should note that the neochoroi for the Charistian treasury at Delos were chosen by the Charistians, as we know from Hellenistic inscriptions. So here the donor city, not the sanctuary, had responsibility or control of the treasury and its contents. Inscriptions indicate that this arrangement seems to have been the norm on Delos for buildings erected by other poleis, whereas buildings erected by the Delians remained their responsibility. In short, the choice of treasury personnel for periodic mandatory opening was not uniform, but varied from sanctuary to sanctuary, and even within a sanctuary. Aside from these mandatory openings, we know that some thesauroi housed monetary fines and fees for treatment, and were open to disperse funds for these purposes and others. An inscription of 369-8 BC from Oropos mentions opening a thesauros to provide funds for inscribing a stele, for a sacrifice made after making changes to divine property, and for reimbursing the neochoros. And at Oropos in the 3rd century BC, the Silogeos opened the treasury for the purpose of melting down old votives. Epigraphical evidence indicates that the placement of treasuries also seems to have fallen under the control of sanctuary officials, who themselves were sometimes charged with providing the buildings. From the Asklepion on Kos comes an inscription of around 242 BC, or shortly before, which decrees the building of a thesauros in the sanctuary. The choice of location was left to a committee of priests of the god and other sanctuary officials. The sacred law of Andania also stipulates that the hieroi, along with the architect, must provide 2 securable treasuries, that one must be in the temple, so this must be some kind of money box, and the other should be near the fountain. A 3rd century inscription from the sanctuary of Kybele in Chalcedon stipulates that the priestess should furnish or equip a treasury, and an inscription of around 250 to 200 from the sanctuary of Artemis Pergeia at Halicarnassus concerning the sale of a priesthood instructs the priestess to construct, that is, to fund, a treasury. It is unclear whether these treasuries erected by priestesses were the same form and size as those funded by poleis or tyrants. In the case of the latter, that is, the poleis or tyrants, it is hard to imagine that these important patrons had no say whatsoever in the placement of the buildings that they funded. Indeed, the location of treasuries appears to have been carefully considered. And here I will only refer to treasuries that leave physical remains and can be dated, and about sites where more than a couple of treasury buildings are extant. At Olympia, the treasuries were built in a row, close to the ash altar and near the terminus point of the Stadian race, which ended in the Altus in its earliest phase, right here. That is, the treasuries were built close to the center of religious activity. But construction did not occur one building adjacent to another and on down the row. They began instead at the west end, and here they're shown in chronological order. They began at the west end, then the next were placed further to the east, and the vacancies were slowly filled in, with numbers 2, 5, and 9 being the latest. The identities of most patrons are known from inscriptions and from Pausanias, although some remain unknown. At Delphi, oh my God, here, okay. I don't know what happened. At Delphi, the placement of treasuries, here marked with colored dots, looks haphazard, but it is not. The treasuries tend to face doorways in the precinct walls and cluster around the Temple of Apollo and along key pathways leading to the temple and altar and in the area of the air. So this plan gives you the key pathways through the sanctuaries, and these small white buildings, for example, are some of the many treasuries that we have in the sanctuary, and it gives you some idea of their placement. The identities of the patrons, here we go, of these treasuries at Delphi are based on inscriptions, or more usually, a combination of Pausanias' account, dates of historical events, and or architectural forms. The last category of evidence, architectural forms, can be problematic because of rebuilding, and not always on the same site, as well as reuse of older material. There are apparent chronological preferences. The earliest of the treasuries known to us at Delphi is the Corinthian treasury, number 308 in pink, right here, from the first half of the 7th century BC, which was originally constructed by Kypselos according to Plutarch. The partially surviving inscription dates from the first half of the 5th century. 9 treasuries in blue were constructed at Delphi in the first half of the 6th century. Most stand close to a pathway and west of the temple, which is indicated at 422, right here. So there's the temple, and here are some of those blue treasuries. And these treasuries from the first half of the 6th century marched down the southwestern slope. The mid and second half of the 6th century, in red, brought several buildings to the south. The Phocidian and Athenian treasuries, in green, numbers 223 and 6, right here, were located for maximum visibility for anyone walking northward from the Siphnian treasury or southwest, this way, from the temple. From the last quarter of the 5th century into the 4th century, treasuries clustered near the eastern precinct doorways, over here, these dark purple ones. The 2 treasuries in the Athena Pronaia sanctuary at Delphi, numbers 33 and 32 here, stand side by side adjacent to the temple of Athena, which is at number 29. The Aeolic treasury, number 33, likely erected by Massalia, based on a fragmentary inscription, sometime between 540 and 500, received war booty from Romans after their victory at Veii in 395 BC in the form of a gold crater on a bronze base. The crater, here you see the Massalia treasury, the crater remained there until it was taken by Onomarchos in the Phocian War. The Doric treasury, number 32, of around 475 to 470 BC, had metopes decorated with a battle scene, and Pausanias recounts that statues of Roman emperors were kept here. Like all the structures in the Athena Pronaia sanctuary, both of these treasuries opened to the south. On Delos, inventories designate buildings holding precious goods as oikoi. Here, we focus only on treasuries in the Apollo sanctuary, although there are many sanctuaries and treasuries on the island. So here, the Apollo sanctuary. The oikos of the Naxians at number 6 of the 6th century, for example, held bronze objects, trireme fittings, a leather cuirass, greaves, and daggers, according to inscribed accounts. Epigraphic evidence also attests to oikoi of the Delians, Charistians, Andrians, Caeans, Myconians, and Siphnians. 5 buildings stood at the northern curved boundary of the sanctuary, numbers 16 to 20. 16 to 20 here. The most western structure, 16, is of around 600 to 500, perhaps built by the Charistians, while all the other 4 date around 500 to 450. Of these 4, number 17 is the oldest and closest to the oldest temple at number 11, which dates towards the end of the 6th century. Some scholars see these 5 structures as treasuries, and some may also have served as hestiatoria. In addition, Gruben interpreted numbers 43 and 44 so down here, as serving dual purposes as treasuries and as dining halls. And Bruneau and Dukas suggest the same for the oikos of the Naxians at number 6. We tend to be obsessed with assigning specific functions to buildings and rooms, but buildings and rooms may have been much more multifunctional than our archaeological categories allow for. Nemea's Zeus sanctuary is credited with 9 oikoi regarded as treasuries, all of which are dated to the 5th century BC, and like those at Olympia, are arranged in a row. And it's these buildings right here. They face to the north in the direction of the altar and temple of Zeus. Numbers 2, 3, and 9. Let's see what I'm doing here. 2, 3, and 9 were the earliest, and most of these oikoi were either destroyed or renovated for other uses by the late 4th century BC. Their architecture differs markedly from the treasuries at Olympia and most of those at Delphi, in being much longer structures and lacking porches with 2 columns and antis. And Miller allows the possibility that the buildings were multifunctional. Oikos 4, let's try this again, here, is peculiar in being an open structure with colonnades on all sides, an arrangement that recalls the monopteros at Delphi. Miller conjectures that each of the structures was constructed by a city-state and that 2 stone inscriptions, one of the late 4th century reading Rolion, the other of the 5th century and inscribed Epidaurion, may pertain to these structures. At the Horion on Samos, the earliest treasuries cluster around the altar area. The first building activity is in the northeast, and all these little structures that you see, I'm going to try to be so careful here. All of these are treasuries. So Naiskos 1 and 2 date to the early 7th century BC. Those are up here. And Naiskos 4 was constructed after 680. So it's this building, which is overlaid by 6. Naiskos 3 to the southeast here is of around 640 to 630. Then Naiskos 6 overlaying 4 and Naiskos 7 just opposite date around 590. So 7 is over here. Just a few years after Naiskos 5. So 590, just a few years after Naiskos 5, while Naiskos 8 to 10 are of around 575 BC. And those are here, 9 and 10, 8 and 9, and 10 is actually over here next to the votive Geneleos group and on the Sacred Way. And it is exactly here, along the Sacred Way, that later 6th century buildings deemed temples, marked here with T, the letter T, but probably used as treasuries, were roughly laid out in a row. Written accounts make it clear that treasury buildings were both containers of votives and, as already mentioned, offerings themselves. This may be the gist of the restored inscription from the Cnidian treasury at Delphi, which specifies that this Thesauros and Agalmata are dedications. And Pausanias reports the same for the inscription on the treasury of Gela at Olympia, which is foundation 12 here at the far right. We will return a bit later to this issue of Thesauros plus Agalmata in an inscription. Ancient written sources make it clear that treasuries held valuable objects, although we should keep in mind that Pausanias says that nothing was to be seen in any of the treasuries at Delphi. Some scholars interpret this to mean that the treasuries had been plundered by the time of his visit. But I wonder if he meant that the contents were not visible. In other words, the doors were closed, and or the tour guide told him nothing. In any case, other authors cite objects in Delphi treasuries, such as the 2 stone statues in the treasury of Spina, already mentioned, with the guy who was supposed to be fined. At Olympia, Pausanias records the contents of several treasuries. He claims that the enormously heavy bronze thalamoi in the Sicyonian treasury on Foundation 1 contained Pelops' gold-hilted sword and an ivory horn dedicated by Miltiades, the son of Cimon. Polemon reports that the Metapontine treasury on Foundation 10 held 132 silver fialae, 2 silver wine pitchers, a silver drinking vessel, and 3 gilt fialae. and that the Byzantine treasury on Foundation 5 contained a triton made of cypress wood, holding a silver cup, a silver siren, 2 silver drinking cups, a silver calyx, a gold wine pitcher, and 2 drinking horns. This inventory has led at least one scholar to posit that these treasuries also were used as banquet houses, as seems to have been the case for some of the treasuries at Delos. Inscribed inventories of treasuries, particularly those on Delos and the Athenian Acropolis, together with the accounts of ancient authors, inform us as to the contents of treasuries. These buildings housed a seemingly endless list of portable, fragile, or precious objects, as well as quite ordinary objects, things made of porphyry, glass, iron, amber, bronze and gilt bronze, wood and gilt wood, ivory, gold, silver and gold jewelry, silver vessels, and other objects, including a silver distaff and a silver mask, gold crowns, gold leaves, seals of stone and precious metals, vessels, furniture, trays, lyres, coins, this is important, mirrors, nails, textiles, tools, combs, string, and daggers, thaumateria, armor, weapons, bridles, anvils, baskets, oil, resin, braziers, even handcuffs. This list is by no means exhaustive, but gives a sense of the variety of objects. Some treasuries were specialized in their contents. Strabo reports that the city of Cyzicus possessed 3 thesauroi, 1 each for weapons, tools or implements, and grain. Let us return to the issue of agamlata plus thesauros, the inscription that occurs on the Cnidian treasury at Delphi. Roux proposes that treasury houses were constructed specifically to house statues of precious materials. Antonio Hölscher takes this a step further by arguing that the treasuries at Olympia were erected to house a specific sculptural offering, then other objects accrued in the same structure. The large base in the Geloan treasury at Foundation 12 at Olympia may have supported statues. And using Pausanias' account as evidence, Hölscher observes that many of the treasuries held a single extraordinary object that in some cases dates to the time of the building's construction. For example, Pausanias' account of the contents of Foundation 4, the treasury of Epidamnus, includes cedar wood statues of Atlas holding the world and Heracles in the Garden of the Hesperides by the sculptor Theocles, whose date accords with that of the terracotta architectural members belonging to this building. Hölscher reasons similarly for the Megarian treasury on Foundation 11, where the architecture and sculpted pediment date around 510. Within the treasury, Pausanias describes a sculptural group of Heracles fighting Achelous, with additional figures of Zeus, Deianira, and Ares, all of cedar inlaid with gold. Again, the sculptor accords with the date of the building. In the case of the treasury of Selinus on Foundation 9, Pausanias records a statue of Dionysus with feet, hands, and face of ivory, which may have stood on a centrally placed base. But Pausanias does not name a sculptor. The flooring, which was worked to receive this base, was a later addition to the structure. But Hölscher reasons correctly, in my view, that regardless of which statue stood on this base, it is improbable that the building was transformed from a structure that held many small votives to one holding a large central votive. We might contrast this situation with that of the Massilian treasury in the Athena sanctuary at Delphi. This is number 33, just to remind you, which was constructed in the second half of the 6th century BC, but the clamps of the base provide a date of the 4th to 3rd century BC. In other words, this instance would not accord with Hölscher's hypothesis. Was a treasury building meant to hold offerings only from the city that constructed it? Whatever the intention may initially have been, ancient texts make clear that treasuries serve more than just the sponsoring polis. Herodotus writes that objects dedicated by Croesus of Lydia to Apollo at Delphi were displaced from the temple of Apollo to the treasury of Cypselus at number 308, that pink one, after the temple fire of 548. It is important to note here that the objects had been in the temple, that is, the temple had been used as a treasury. In addition, Herodotus goes on to say the gold and silver objects given by Gyges of Lydia were in the treasury of the Clazomenians, which we think may be number 306, although he does not indicate that they were moved from the temple. One wonders how such arrangements were made. Did these kings have some agreement with Cypselus, one tyrant to another? Was this formalized in any way? Or was this matter decided by the Delphi officials, as Jacquemin suggests? Also worth noting in this context is Herodotus' claim that the Lydian king Croesus endowed the treasury of the Corinthians with 2 vessels, one of silver, the other of gold. At Olympia, the Sicyonian treasury, on Foundation 1, housed objects from Locri, including a shield, helmet, and greaves, and a wooden image of Apollo with a gold-plated head, as well as the dedications by the Athenian Miltiades. Whatever the original focal point of the treasury may have been, a single spectacular offering or not, and whoever was allowed to put things in there, by the time that Pausanias arrived at Olympia, Roman statues that had once stood in the Metroon, here, were now located in the treasury of Cyrene, as if the latter was a storage place, like a modern cellar or garage. The transfer of objects from the Temple of Apollo to the treasury of Cypselus at Delphi seems to have been an emergency measure, but the other examples of objects deposited in treasuries belonging to a city other than that of the donor, or moved to treasuries from another location, raises the question of why. Why were things moved around? That treasuries became overcrowded is, of course, one possibility, but then how were things chosen to be moved? How were new destinations selected? And should we again presume that the decisions were made by sanctuary officials or the custodians of the treasury in question? Likewise, what was the impulse to move sculpture out of the Metroon in the first place and into a treasury? And how did this come about? This overview has enabled us to see that treasury buildings should be defined by function, not necessarily by architecture, and that they seem to have had multiple functions. Their administration varies. When we know the patrons, the earliest treasuries, the Sicyonian at Olympia, the Cypselid at Delphi, were erected by tyrants, and such structures could serve to house offerings from other rulers. Then, in at least one case, the Corinthian treasury at Delphi, the building was reinscribed by the polis. All other treasuries, so far as we know, were dedicated by poles, not individuals. Can we talk about treasuries as initially a prerogative of individuals, then as civic offerings? In other words, are they politically loaded? The motivations for their construction are varied. For example, military victory, athletic victory, but they themselves are votives, thank offerings, as well as housing votives not just from their own patron city, but from others as well. At Olympia, they may have been focused on a primary offering, but we cannot say this about treasuries elsewhere. Certain polis are especially active with regard to treasuries. Sicyon, Megara, Syracuse, Cyrene, and I would argue Corinth, have treasuries at both Delphi and Olympia. Siphnos erected treasuries at Delphi and on Delos. It is intriguing that the construction of treasuries diminished on the mainland by the late 4th century, but they were constructed at Miletos, Samos, and Samothrace in the Hellenistic period. Why did treasuries stop being built? Were gifts now stored in temples or elsewhere, or were different kinds of gifts being made? Was there sufficient space or space of other kinds? Was there a shift from the polis as donor to individual as donor, especially in the period of Hellenistic kings? Like so many questions in this talk, the answers remain elusive, limited by the current lack of evidence. This doesn't mean, however, that we should stop asking such questions about Greek sanctuaries or seeking for answers. Thank you. Evaristo.
Thank you very much, Judy. Fantastic to hear about treasuries. Now, as we have heard about touch on the material activities and also about treasuries, so I think that we all deserve a little bit of nutrition, some being together. So you're all very, very welcome to come to the Finnish Institute, where we have a reception. Many of you know where we are, but certainly just follow the lead. We're very, very close by. It's just 2 minutes from here. Thank you.